Hey guys, we are going to wrap up this part talking about alkenes and alkynes in terms of talking about how we use these molecules in nature or where we find them in nature. The first one is something kind of fun, is, ooh, dropped my pen, is that alkenes make up a lot of the scent components in essential oils. So it's between alkenes and esters, which we'll learn about in a couple chapters. But alkenes are also pretty smelly, and especially alkenes as the ones you'll see below. So for example, geraniol is the smell of roses. It has two alkenes in it. This alkene here is not a cis-trans isomer because we have two methyl groups on the end. However, we specifically have this trans alkene in here as well. It has to be trans, or else if it's cis, it smells different to us. But specifically, geraniol, the smell of roses, is a trans alkene. We also have citronellol, which you'll notice is a very similar molecule to geraniol. This is lemongrass. So when you have a lemongrass essential oil, it has this is what's responsible for that smell. You also have myrcene, which is the smell of bay leaves. So this one's interesting because it has these two double bonds right next to each other. So it's actually especially reactive, but in terms of our bodies and how we smell them, that's what makes kind of the earthy, I guess, aroma of the bay leaves is from that there. And then lastly, we also have limonene, which is the smell of lemons, and this one has a cis alkene. So we see both cis and trans alkenes within our essential oils. So these are just a couple. There's many, many more, but these are a couple of the most common ones. Additionally, alkenes are very important in terms of hormones. So specifically, this molecule here, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, it's that name right there, is a insect hormone, or specifically for this silkworm moth, it's a sex pheromone, and it specifically has a trans and cis alkene inside of it. So if those particular alkenes are different isomers, maybe they're switched, then it's no longer the same pheromone for those insects. So similarly to how essential oils are things that smell good to us, this molecule smells good to insects, and it's what helps them mate. There's been a lot of research. I don't have the particular molecules on here, but there are similar things with humans in terms of what pheromones either men or women give off that attract other men or women. There's a lot of interesting research around that in the organic molecules around that as well. Lastly, a lot of you guys are interested in nutrition. Many of you are exercise science majors and have studied a lot of nutrition. And when you're talking about fats, a lot of the times that you're talking about unsaturated or saturated fats and which ones are good for your body, which ones are not as good for your body. So here's a chart that explains where those names come from. So saturated fats look like this, where the fat molecule is saturated in its number of hydrogens, just like how we talked at the very beginning of our class today about saturated versus unsaturated or hydrocarbons. It's the same thing here. We just have a little bit of carboxylic acid on the end here. But we have this saturated alkane chain, and that's called our saturated fat, saturated in hydrogens. These are molecules that come as like fats in meats and in kind of like processed foods that we see. These are typically seen as the ones that are not as good for us. The reason for that is because saturated fats with no double bonds in there, we kind of think of double bonds as like kinks in the system. Because all of the single bonds can rotate in any way, shape, or form, those single bonds can pack really tightly. So at room temperature, saturated fats are typically solid, and they can pack really, really tight into your bloodstream and stuff like that. When you start getting into unsaturated fats, such as the rest of these three here, you'll see that a monounsaturated fat or polyunsaturated fat, those are the ones that are good for us. So like the fats that are in avocados or olive oil or really plant-based fats in general, they have these cis double bonds in here, our cis units of unsaturation. So we're missing two of those hydrogens. It's unsaturated in hydrogens. And so these are the ones, as I said, that are good for us. And part of the reason for that is we have this little kink in the system. So in reality, it's more like a shape, like a maybe like a very wide V shape. And because of that, it makes it so that we can't stack these molecules quite so easily. So these are more fats that are liquid at room temperature, more like oils than solids. And then lastly, the last section is trans fats. So you'll notice that the trans fats and the saturated fats have almost the same look to them. It's just the trans fat has a double bond in it in the trans configuration. They're on opposite sides of each other. And these are like the ones that are supposed to be like the absolute worst for us, right? So these are the ones from processed foods. So maybe the food industry or how they prepare that food, it's heated up a lot. And in heating a fat molecule, you typically will switch it from a cis alkene to a trans alkene. But in the process of making that fat, or however they're producing it, either from saturated fat or from unsaturated fat, they'll end up producing trans fats. So the trans double bond is going to be incorporated into that fat molecule. So these are, because they have that trans double bond, they can pack a lot tighter, just like the saturated fats. So a lot of these, as it says here, a lot of countries are phasing them out. They're not allowing companies to put trans fats into their products. That's the word I was looking for. So this is a processed fat instead of a natural fat. So you guys are very interested in nutrition in general, and this is a really good infographic talking about how just the presence of alkene and even the structure of the alkene in your fat is super important, or fat that you're eating is super important to how your body processes that fat and stores that fat. Okay, so those are some examples of how we see alkenes in nature. And I'm sure you guys will come up with some other ones. There's many, many, many more ways that we see alkenes in nature. And again, and we will see more about these molecules in the future. We have a whole chapter just based off of lipids, which is talking about fats pretty much. So we will talk more in depth about all of this stuff in the future. I'll see you guys next time.